one driver who will make his way through 42 other cars and 500 miles to decide who will win the Daytona 500.
Dale Earnhardt was one of the sports icons.
As a kid, he was the man in black.
He was the three-car. He was the real deal.
Dale Earnhardt was larger than life. Everybody was just in awe of him and his aura.
One of Dale Earnhardt Sr.'s earliest race cars disappeared for decades, and its story eventually led back to a forgotten chapter of the Earnhardt family. Long before Dale became NASCAR's legendary Intimidator, he was a young driver trying to make a name for himself with whatever car he could get behind the wheel of. But one of those early machines would go on to become far more significant than anyone could have imagined.
After the accident in Turn 4 at the end of the Daytona 500, we've lost Dale Earnhardt. Our prayers and wishes and our effort right now, this moment, is with Teresa and the Earnhardt family. NASCAR has lost its greatest driver ever.
So where did the mysterious car go? And what did its disappearance reveal about the family behind one of NASCAR's greatest legends? Join us as we uncover the story behind Dale Earnhardt Sr.'s forgotten race car, the car that started it all. Dale Earnhardt drove dozens of cars during his career, but one of the most important was a machine most NASCAR fans have never seen. It was pink and yellow. It wasn't even his own car, and it belonged to the years before anyone called him the Intimidator. Right from the beginning, Dale Earnhardt Sr. never had an easy path into professional racing. He did not have money or any sort of connections. All he had was a backyard garage behind his mother's house in Kannapolis, the tools his father had left in it, and a passion for racing that was impossible to separate from the grief of losing the man who had taught him everything he knew. After the death of his dad, Dale walked into that garage and started doing what his father had done for years. He built race cars and found drivers who would let him work on their cars for experience and exposure. He scraped together whatever funding he could find and used it to get himself onto dirt tracks across North Carolina and South Carolina in whatever machine was available. Dale was not particularly patient about any of this. He dropped out of school in the 9th grade because school felt like an obstacle between him and the only thing he genuinely cared about. However, his father did not approve of that decision. He had wanted his son to have an education and had worried about what would happen to a boy who had nothing but the garage to fall back on. Dale dropped out anyway. His first race car was not his. The K2 1956 Ford Victoria that Dale Earnhardt drove in his earliest racing years was owned by a man named David Oliver and raced at the old Concord Motor Speedway in Concord, North Carolina. Ralph Earnhardt, Dave's dad, had built the engine in those earliest days and drove it in a distinctive pink and yellow paint scheme that nobody who saw it ever quite forgot. The color combination was unusual enough to make the car immediately recognizable on a track full of vehicles that looked nothing like it, and the young man driving it was already unusual enough in his racecraft that people noticed him too. He was wild on the track in those early years. James Miller, another North Carolina car owner who let Dale drive his own 1956 Ford Victoria after Ralph nudged him in that direction, remembered the young Earnhardt clearly decades later. He never won in Miller's car, but he never got it torn up to the point where they couldn't fix it either, which, in the informal economy of early dirt track racing, was essentially the baseline requirement for getting another opportunity. You did not have to win. You had to be worth watching, and you had to bring the car back in repairable condition. Dale was both of those things, and the combination kept doors open for him through the lean years of the early 1970s when nothing was coming easily. He got married young and had children young, and the financial pressure of a family combined with the financial pressure of trying to build a racing career on no money was a combination that would have broken most people. However, it did not break Dale Earnhardt. It made him more stubborn and more willing to do whatever it took to get onto a racetrack. And the small backyard garage behind Mama's house in Kannapolis, the one where his father had worked and built and eventually died, remained the physical center of everything he was trying to do. So what was the car that was hidden in that space for years? And what made it so significant that even Dale Jr. was shocked when he encountered it? The pink and yellow car that disappeared. Of all the cars associated with Dale Earnhardt Sr.'s early racing career, the pink and yellow K2 1956 Ford Victoria holds a special place in the mythology. It was not the most powerful or fastest, and certainly not the most sophisticated he had ever driven. But it was the car that started the story. The car's paint scheme, that bright pink and yellow combination, was unusual enough in the context of 1970s dirt track racing to make it memorable even to people who only saw it briefly. Pink was not a color that most racing teams associated with competition. It was not aggressive or threatening. It did not communicate the intimidation that Dale Earnhardt would later build his entire career identity around as the Intimidator. It was, in the most literal sense, the complete opposite of that image. And yet, it was the beginning of everything. The actual car spent decades in storage, moving through different hands as old race cars tend to do when the people who drove them move on to bigger platforms and more prominent machines. The location of the original K2 Ford Victoria that Dale Sr. raced has been a subject of interest among serious Earnhardt collectors and NASCAR historians for years. Some accounts place it in storage in North Carolina, kept by people who understood its significance. Others suggest it changed hands multiple times without the new owners fully understanding what they had acquired. What is consistent across all accounts is that the car was not on public display. It was simply somewhere out of sight. The reasons things like this get hidden for 20 years are rarely dramatic. Cars get stored because someone runs out of space and cannot bring themselves to sell. They get forgotten because the people who knew their significance get busy with other things. They get moved from location to location until the thread connecting them to their origin story gets harder to trace. And sometimes, in the case of something connected to a man as beloved as Dale Earnhardt Sr., they get kept out of sight because the person holding them isn't sure the world is ready to see them yet, or because the grief of the connection is still too present to make sharing comfortable. What exactly motivated the storage decisions around the car found in Dale Earnhardt Sr.'s garage? And what did the people who eventually discovered it find when they got there? What Dale Jr. found when he started looking. Dale Earnhardt Jr. has been one of the most active archivists of his own family's history that any sporting dynasty has ever produced. While his father was alive, Dale Jr. was still in the early stages of his own racing career, focused forward rather than backward. After Dale Sr. died on the final lap of the 2001 Daytona 500, the responsibility of preserving and understanding the family's history fell to the people he left behind, and Dale Jr. took that responsibility more seriously than most. His property in North Carolina, known as Dirty Mo Acres, contains what he calls the race car graveyard, a wooded area where over 75 wrecked and retired NASCAR machines from multiple generations of racing have been collected and preserved. The collection includes cars driven by Chase Elliott, Jeff Gordon, Jimmy Johnson, Danica Patrick, and Brad Keselowski, alongside multiple cars from Dale Jr.'s own career. None of them are for sale. They are stored in the woods because Dale Jr. could not bring himself to see them scrapped, so he built a private museum in the trees instead. The collection is not open to the public. It is for family and close friends, a physical archive of racing history that would otherwise have been crushed and melted down for metal. His connection to historic vehicles runs even deeper than the graveyard. In 2018, Dale Jr. walked into a storage shed in an old gas station in Alabama and found something he had not expected: his original 1990 Legends car, the small machine he had won races in as a teenager before his professional career began. He identified it from a welded gusset he had personally added to the left rear shock tower mount decades earlier. He said he could not believe the thing still existed. His father had sold it to a man named John Ray in Alabama after Dale Jr. was done with it, and it had moved from there to Kenny Allison, Donnie Allison's son, and had been sitting in that old gas station shed ever since, without anyone making a particular fuss about what it was. The underground workshop beneath Mama's house was the most recent discovery in a long series of them and, by Dale Jr.'s own admission, the most unexpected. He had been visiting that house his whole life. He had sat in it as a child while Mama sold cookbooks to fans who made the trip to Kannapolis specifically to spend time with her. He had known about the backyard garage where his grandfather had worked and where his father had started his career. He had not known about the crawl space underneath the house. That had been Ralph Earnhardt's secret, kept so well that even his grandson did not know it existed until someone finally told the story. And the discovery raised a question that goes right to the heart of why Dale Earnhardt Sr.'s story matters so deeply to so many people. What exactly was it about this family that kept producing something extraordinary from almost nothing? The Intimidator's other side. The public image of Dale Earnhardt Sr. was one of the most carefully constructed and genuinely earned in the history of American sport. The Intimidator, the man in black, the driver in the black number 3 Chevrolet, who rattled his competitors, moved people out of the way when he needed to, won on restrictor plate tracks by doing things that nobody else was brave enough to attempt, and stared down every track in America with the particular certainty of someone who had been broke and beaten and overlooked too many times to be worried about what anyone thought of his driving style. That image was real. The competitiveness was genuine, and the willingness to use every inch of the track and to make contact when contact was required was simply how Dale Earnhardt raced. And it was effective enough that 7 championship trophies sat in his case when he was finished. Only Richard Petty had matched that number. Every other driver in NASCAR history was behind both of them. But the backyard garage in Kannapolis told a different story about who the Intimidator actually was when the race was over, and the cameras were gone. The wealth, fame, and championships transformed his external circumstances without fundamentally altering the character that the garage had built. The cars he kept, the ones that ended up in various states of storage and preservation across North Carolina, were not trophies to him in the conventional sense. They were something more practical than that. Objects that carried memories, that represented specific chapters of a story he had built by hand, and that deserved to be preserved, because throwing them away would mean letting those chapters disappear. So what happened to the people connected to the car on the most significant day in NASCAR history? And how did that day shape everything that came after it? The weight that nobody who was there has ever fully put down. On February 18, 2001, Dale Earnhardt Sr. was running third on the final lap of the Daytona 500. His son Dale Jr. was in the lead. His DEI teammate Michael Waltrip was in second. Dale Sr. was in third in the black number 3 Chevrolet, doing exactly what he had always done at Daytona, protecting his cars, blocking for his teammates, and using his presence and his reputation to keep other drivers from challenging the lead. Coming off the 4th turn on the final lap, Contact sent the number 3 car into the outside wall at nearly full racing speed. The impact was not the most dramatic crash the Daytona 500 had ever seen. Cars had hit that wall before and driven away. People watching in the stands and on television had seen worse crashes and seen the driver climb out and wave. Ken Schrader, whose car was also involved in the incident, climbed out of his own vehicle and ran to the number 3 car immediately. What he saw in those moments, what made him wave urgently to the medical crew before they had even reached the car, is something he has never described publicly. He has said only that for reasons that became apparent in the hours that followed, he has chosen to keep what he saw to himself. Dale Earnhardt Sr. died on impact from a basilar skull fracture. He was a 49-year-old skilled racer who had won 76 Cup Series races. He had also won 7 championships, and he died on the last lap of the race he had won more times than anyone else in history, while his son was crossing the finish line in first place. The sport stopped in that moment, and the grief was immediate and national in a way that the death of a racing driver does not always produce. Because Dale Earnhardt was not just a racing driver to the people who followed him. He was the kind of American character, the working-class son who made himself great by refusing every obstacle, and who had done it in a way that made millions of people feel that their own version of that struggle was legitimate and visible. When he died, something genuinely irreplaceable went with him. The investigation that followed focused on the safety equipment and the circumstances of the crash in ways that eventually led to significant improvements in NASCAR's approach to driver safety. The HANS device became mandatory. Track safety standards were reviewed and upgraded, and the conversation about what was owed to drivers in terms of protection was permanently altered. Those changes saved lives in the years that followed. They could not save Dale Earnhardt, but they were, in a sense, the practical legacy of what his death had forced the sport to confront. Ken Schrader, who had been Dale's closest friend in the sport for years, said in a 2026 interview that 25 years after what he called Black Sunday, nothing had ever felt the same. He described it as losing a best friend. He said that the emotions of the hard minutes that followed the crash, the urgency of waving to the medical crew, and the weight of what he had seen had stayed with him. 25 years later, Ken Schrader was still carrying the weight of that day. But Dale Earnhardt Jr. chose a different way to carry his family's history. So where does Dale Jr. stand today? And how has he turned the memories, machines, and stories of his family into a living record of NASCAR history? The Earnhardt legacy is still being written. Dale Earnhardt Jr. turned 52 years old in 2026 and shows no sign of slowing down his role as his family's unofficial archivist and NASCAR's most passionate historian. His Dirty Mo Acres property in North Carolina continues to grow as new wrecked and retired machines find their way to the race car graveyard in the trees. His Dale Jr. Download podcast continues to surface stories that the formal historical record has missed, like the underground workshop beneath Mama's house that he had never talked about before, which arrived in his conversation with the particular freshness of something that had been sitting just below the surface, waiting to be spoken aloud. Mama's house in Kannapolis still stands. It is still, as Dale Jr. described it, like stepping back into the 1950s when you walk through the door. Every time he goes back, there is something new to find, because the place has been accumulating history for 70 years, without anyone making a systematic effort to catalog it. That is both the challenge and the appeal of it. The discoveries keep happening because nobody has finished looking. The pink and yellow K2 1956 Ford Victoria that Dale Earnhardt Sr. drove in his earliest races has become one of the most sought-after pieces of Earnhardt memorabilia in existence. Die-cast collectors have tracked every version of the model. The original with the apricot and silver roof. The error version with the pink roof that Action Racing produced before correcting the color. And the copper edition limited run of only 36 pieces, with the obsessive attention to detail that serious collectors bring to objects that carry significant historical weight. The actual car, the physical machine with Ralph Earnhardt's engine in it, remains one of the more elusive pieces of the family's early history. Would Dale Earnhardt Sr. have become the Intimidator if Ralph Earnhardt had lived long enough to watch him race? Or was it precisely the loss of his father at 22 years old and the responsibility of walking into that backyard garage alone that made him the man the sport has never stopped talking about? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.